Good night, everyone. Elohim here. This time I bring you this amazing guy who is Peter Muise. I think is how to pronounce his last name. If not, he will correct me without any problem. He's the author of um, Witches and Warlocks of Massachusetts, Legends, Victims, and Sinister Spellcasters. How are you doing, my friend?
Doing good. Thank you for inviting me tonight. I'm excited to talk about my book and just chat. So thank you. And my name is Peter Muise. So you're pretty close.
Yeah, I was very, very close.
You're very close.
Peter, where do you born? And which is your favorite city? And what you like more about that city?
I was born in Haverhill, Massachusetts, which is a small city on the New Hampshire border in northern Massachusetts. And I live now just outside Boston, which is the capital of Massachusetts, in a place called Brookline. And I just love this area. I mean, I've lived here pretty much my whole life. You know, I went away to college in a different state, but came back to this area. I like the history of this area. For instance, there are lots of great old cemeteries near me, which I like. I love to explore cemeteries. So you often see me in an old cemetery. There's a cemetery in this town that dates back to the 1600s, which has some great old gravestones, some gravestones of some famous people. There's even the gravestone of the stepmother of someone involved in the Salem witch trials, Cotton Mather, who was a minister involved in the Salem witch trials. His stepmother is buried there. It has a very beautiful gravestone, I will say. Anna Mather's gravestone is quite beautiful. So I like that about this area, the history. I like the climate. And I've just, I'm sort of used to the culture here of people being kind of reserved on the outside. This is a place where people are not outgoing in public, but are very friendly once you get to know them, I think.
Thank you for that, Peter. I love when people brings me to new places, just telling me about it. So I just visualize myself in there. And it's very nice for people who, when they are listening to these kind of things, because they feel like they are being part of the place. Peter, tell me which was for you the inspiration behind this book, because coming from Massachusetts, you have a disease. You could write a book on witchcraft like everybody else, a book on spellcasting, but you go deeper and take a difficult statement there, like I'm going to do something very different.
Yeah.
And you make this book that is not a typical book on, oh, this is witchcraft, people witches in Salem, and these kind of things. You go very beyond, very deep in the history. Tell me, how was this? Why this? How do you inspire yourself to do this?
Sure. I mean, I've always been interested in sort of legends and folklore and things like that, even when I was a small kid, right? I grew up in the 70s, and my brother and I were very much into kind of weird things on TV, like In Search Of, like hearing about Bigfoot and UFOs and the Bermuda Triangle and all those things, which were very popular in the 70s. And then when I got older, and I also like mythology and folklore, like Greek mythology, Roman mythology, all Norse mythology, those things. When I got older, I went to college, I studied anthropology, and you kind of learn about folklore and myths from around the world. And only when I was out of college did I realize I didn't quite know a lot about the folklore of the place I lived my whole life. I didn't really know about the folklore and legends of Massachusetts and New England in general. And so I started to research those topics. I started to write a blog in 2008 called, you can look it up, New England Folklore, that's the name of the blog, newenglandfolklore.blogspot.com. And I just started to look up local legends and, local folklore and things like that. And I still update the blog even now. So I've been writing on that blog for a long time, it's over 13 years, I think. And so as I was doing this, I would find all these interesting stories about witches. And I finally just came to this place where I'm like, I wish there was a book that had all the witchcraft stories from Massachusetts in one place. And I looked and there was no book like that. And so I decided, okay, I'm just going to write the book that I want to see. And so I just went out there and started to collect all the witch stories, witch legends that I could find and put them in one book. So it does have a section about the Salem witch trials, which there are a lot of books about Salem witch trials, but there really was so much happening before the Salem witch trials and happening after the Salem witch trials that's also interesting. So I just wanted to have that all in one place, as much for myself as for other people. Like I can just look up that story like, oh, here's that story from 1811, and here's that story from 1843 or whatever, and have it in one book. So that was my inspiration, I guess, to write it.
Got it. Thank you for this, Peter. Is any specific legend or part of the lore or the folklore with which you feel more familiarized, more relate, something that you say, oh, this is the story that I want to tell?
That's interesting. You know, when I was looking at all the material, I kind of grouped it in some different sections, right? There's sort of like the Puritan era, like the 1600s to the early 1700s. And that was sort of the witch trial era, right? Which really ended with the Salem witch trials in 1692. There was a little bit of residual stuff after that. And that's the era where witchcraft was a crime punishable by death in Massachusetts. And that's where you have the Salem witch trials. You have, you know, 4 women were executed in Boston. Another woman was executed in Cambridge. People were executed out in Western Massachusetts. So that's one era. I was like, okay, this is interesting. But after the Salem trials ended and that was no longer a crime, people in Massachusetts still believed in witches. They just didn't think you could prove it in court, basically. So you have this interesting period from like the early 1700s to the middle of the 19th century, really, where people still believed in witches, but they were not bringing people to trials. That's where you get kind of these semi-legendary situations where usually it's, you know, an unpopular person in town is believed to be a witch, and the legend will talk about how it was proved they're a witch, and then the legend goes on to talk about how you would then basically defeat the witch, right? A lot of the witch stories are not pro-witch. They are sort of explaining to you how you would defend yourself against a witch. So I sort of like those 19th century, those stories from the 18th and 19th century, because they don't end in executions, which is great, but they also have a lot of the classic witch folklore really brought forward into a new era. And then even if you look in the 20th and 21st century, still there are legends about witches. Usually they're sort of talked about more as often ghost stories now. Like people say, oh, well, this road is haunted by a group of nuns who were executed for worshiping Satan, right? Or this path in the woods is haunted by 2 boys who were executed by the Puritans for being witches. And although those stories aren't necessarily true, like they are mostly legend, it's interesting to see how they kind of hark back to the history of the area, right? And then people still remember there were witches in Massachusetts. They're just talking about in sort of a modern, more paranormal way, right? They're talking about ghosts and paranormal hunting for ghosts of witches versus like, oh, my neighbor is a witch. But the witch idea is still here in Massachusetts, which I think is interesting, you know? And so my husband and I went to a lot of those haunted witch places just to see what we could see. And luckily we didn't see any ghosts. We always go in the daytime. So I'm not a very good ghost hunter. I'm sort of a coward when it comes to ghost hunting.
I can imagine. That was funny. Peter, is any most of these books are written for people who have like a very long distance relationship. I don't know how to translate that from my mind with the area of witchcraft and magic, but you are practically in the center, a very important part of the history of witchcraft in the United States. Do you feel related with some part of the craft, like spellcasting or divination, astrology, or something in there that calls your attention beyond the folklore?
You know, that's interesting because there's sort of this, a little bit in my mind, there's a distance between the history and the legends of witchcraft and then the practice of witchcraft. Because I think what most people do now, like people who say they're witches, right? Like you or I, like we practice witchcraft. But what we do is very different maybe from what was done in the past, a lot of it. We are not, you know, cursing crops and, you know, tormenting children and all those terrible things, right, that people were accused of doing in the past. I will say, I think what I find kind of inspirational about this area or about the history of witchcraft is kind of, there's like a vibe or an energy in this area, which it's hard to explain. It's just more of, it's sort of a feeling, right? Of, you know, seeing the old houses, seeing the old stone walls, seeing the trees with their bare leaves half the year, you know, against a gray, cloudy sky, and going to those old cemeteries and seeing these gravestones carved in the 1600s. And just, there's an energy, right? And whether that energy is really related to the witches, you know, people accused of the witchcraft in the past, or if it's just related to kind of the energy people give to the idea of witches, right? There is an energy here. And I'll tell, like, there was a witch in Massachusetts named Anne Hibbins. She lived in Boston. She was a wealthy woman. She was very argumentative. You know, she didn't put up with a lot of crap from people. And at that time, women were not supposed to act that way. And she was, you know, protected because her husband was a wealthy person. He was a wealthy politician. When he died, all the people that she had put in their place or yelled at or whatever kind of turned on her, and she was accused of witchcraft and she was executed. And she owned a lot of land, both in Boston and both outside of Boston, including in the town where I live now, in Brookline, Massachusetts. And so I had been trying to find out, what land did she own, right? Where was the tract of land that she and her husband had owned that was taken from her when she died? And I was looking through old maps, and I found this old map, and it seemed to show that the place where I live right now, this house I live in, was smack in the middle of the land that she used to own. And when I realized that my house might have been on land where a witch used to live, my hair like stood up on end. I was like, whoa, this is crazy. This is crazy, right? I was like, had this freak out moment. And so then I went, you know, I calmed down. I had to go to the supermarket. So I walked to the supermarket. It was a cloudy March day. The wind was blowing. The sky was gray. As soon as I go into the supermarket, a big red-tailed hawk flies into the window, the glass window, right where I am. And I was like, oh, this is really freakish, right? This is really strange. I finished my shopping and go outside. There on the ground was a dead sparrow, which the hawk had tried to kill. And then Rhiannon by Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac is playing on the sound system. Is this whole like witchy experience. I'm like, what's happening? Like all this because I realized my house is located on land where a witch used to live. So it's sort of this energy around here. But then I realized that I had read the map wrong and that my house is not where the witch used to live at all. But I still had the experience, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, you can tap into that energy, but where does the energy come from? Is it in my mind or is it actually here? And I did later find out where her land was, and it's a park, and you can go visit the park. It's very nice park with like a weird pond with lots of frogs. So it's a long answer.
Yeah, no worries. Peter, this has been amazing. We are super close to the end. People, you can find the book of Peter in the description of this video. Peter, is anything else that you want to say for everybody watching this?
You can check out my blog, newenglandfolklore.blogspot.com. I update it at least monthly, sometimes twice a month, sometimes more, with local folklore, sometimes about witches, sometimes about other things. I'm going to hold up my book. You can buy my book wherever you buy books online, Amazon, bookshop.org, Powell's, wherever you buy books online. So that's my closing statement. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Peter. I hope we can do this again very soon.
Yeah, this was great.
Bye, everyone. Enjoy.